Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. From websites and online stores, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence. Hello friends, I hope that you've been well. I'm sure some of you are already familiar with this particular illustration that I'm showing here. I created it in a previous video, and it is of a princess character that I originally created back in 2019, and I had revisited her for this piece. And I created her back in 2019 with not really giving it much thought, but I ended up drawing a knight character that accompanied her, and then I ended up creating an illustration of them together. So naturally I just started to become a little bit attached to them because I kept drawing them. And so since I did a revised version of the princess character, who I have now named Buttercup, it was only right to revisit this knight character, who I have now named Aster, thanks to the suggestion of a lovely comment in another video. But before we dive into the painting, I just quickly wanted to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace. As I've mentioned in the past, I actually went to school for graphic design, but surprisingly, I am not proficient with coding or HTML. And because of this, maintaining a portfolio and website felt like such a daunting task, even though I knew it was an important tool to have as a creative. Thankfully, Squarespace is a platform that has lots of professional, ready-made templates for you to choose from, and adding in your content as well as making adjustments to the layout is very intuitive and requires zero coding knowledge. Plus, it has automatic image scaling so that it is already ready to go when you view it on mobile or on a desktop. So if you're interested in launching your own website, head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/imawonder for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. To start the illustration, I did the sketches in my sketchbook, and then using a light pad, I traced it and transferred it onto some watercolor paper, which I have then taped down onto a masonite board. For this painting, I decided to use the Paul Rubens watercolors, since that was the paint that was left over on my ceramic palette from a previous painting. I did a few paintings in my sketchbook for my Patreon page, where I did 2 exclusive videos where I kind of did a walkthrough of my skin tone painting approach. I wouldn't call them tutorials, I would definitely call them live walkthroughs. So if you are interested in more of a detailed look at how I approach skin tones with watercolors, I would recommend checking that out. And I'm also using a couple extra tubes of watercolors from Winsor & Newton and Daniel Smith, since I really wanted to use a cerulean blue for her hair as well as magenta throughout the piece, which are both colors that are not in this palette. And as always, details about all of the art supplies will be listed in the description. In today's video, I'm not going to narrate my watercolor technique. If you aren't interested in that, as I mentioned, I do have some videos on my Patreon page where I go more in depth about my watercolor technique. And if you are not able to support me on Patreon, I do have some watercolor videos that I do talk about my actual process a little bit more on my channel already, which I'll have linked in the description if you want to check those out. Instead, I'm actually going to share more so about my observations that I had when creating this piece, as well as chat to you about what I've been up to lately and what I have planned in the near future for my channel, and what else I've been getting up to. As I think I'd stated in the video where I painted Buttercup, the princess, with these newer iterations of these characters, I wasn't aiming for them to be an exact recreation of those illustrations, but rather I just wanted to paint these characters again. It's interesting to see what has relatively stayed the same and what has changed in my style, and as well as my approach with painting watercolor. The knight illustration I did back in 2019 was definitely something I think I had spent more time on, and thus it is a little more detailed and a little cleaner. This painting that I'm working on in this video, I felt a little bit more rushed due to some deadlines that I had to meet, but overall I'm still fairly happy with how she turned out. The way I painted the armor is more or less the same as it was previously. I find painting shiny materials like this with watercolors to be so fun, whether it be armor or latex, things like that. There's just something so mesmerizing about it, and I like that you can really play into the paint's strengths with the varying levels of transparent colors and layers. I illustrated a night a few months ago in another video using alcohol markers, and while overall I really enjoy using that medium, trying to create this shiny effect was definitely more difficult. One of the major differences that I noticed when comparing the two versions of this night Aster was the thickness of the eyebrows, which I know is probably something that seems so minuscule to most people, but for me, it was one of the first things that I noticed. And I think it's pretty funny because I feel as though it's a direct reflection of the beauty trends of each respective year. Don't get me wrong, I still love strong eyebrows, but I do think in the 2019 version of this character, they might have been a touch too strong for my current taste. And I do feel as though back in 2019, probably 2018 as well, I myself was drawing in my eyebrows a lot thicker and darker as well. And since then, I have also kind of tapered and not thinned them out, but I just don't draw them in quite as dark as I used to. So I think it's interesting to see it being reflected in my artwork as well. Similarly, I still love a dark lipstick, which was what I had depicted her with previously. However, I think for this particular character, I no longer feel as though it's fitting for her to wear such bold makeup and lipstick, so I have now adopted a much more natural look for her. Also, before anyone roasts me in the comments about it, I am fully aware that the armor doesn't fully make sense, and I'm okay with that. I have accepted that my artwork is mainly for decorative purposes, so I just don't feel the need to spend that extra time and energy trying to make the armor correct or accurate. I definitely am a style over accuracy type of artist, and so as long as the armor reads as armor, then that's perfectly fine with me. Another difference between the two illustrations is that in the 2019 version, I had done all of the line art in a dark blue acrylic ink. This creates a much cooler, cleaner, and bold appearance, whereas this new version, I used watercolors to do the line art, and I had more color variation, such as using dark blue for the hair and armor, but then I use a dark brown/burgundy for some of her face and features. And I find that using a kind of darker color that corresponds to whatever the line art is for creates a overall softer appearance. Neither approach is better than the other. It just creates a different look, and creating the line art in various colors is something that I've really enjoyed lately. And so it's interesting just to see, even though it's seemingly a small thing, I think visually it looks quite different. Lastly, another style choice that I have since adopted recently is the use of a really strong light source from one side, which casts these strong shapes on the hair and the face. Again, this is not 100% accurate, but stylistically, I think it creates a lot of interest and dimension without having to do a lot of rendering. I think it initially began when I was becoming more familiar with using acrylic paint markers, which is a medium that is generally used in a much more graphic way, and thus it kind of forced me to shade and highlight in strong shapes rather than in gradients. Obviously, you can definitely create gradients with acrylic paint markers, but it's just much more difficult to do so. And since I'm someone who uses so many different mediums, I wanted to use acrylic paint markers in a way that differed from my usual painting mediums. And then from there, I introduced this style into my alcohol marker and color pencil illustrations, and then now finally into my paintings as well. It's interesting how we kind of get into our heads about the way we need to use certain mediums, but when you switch from medium to medium, it's fun to introduce certain things that you had adopted from that medium and then kind of mix it into another. And so even though watercolors typically is a medium that is, much benefited from layering and gradients, which of course is something that I do take advantage of, it is fun to introduce certain style choices that might not initially be something that people would think of, like these graphic minimal shapes, I guess. I have been watching a lot of anime and reading lots of webcomics, so I think that this approach to highlights and shading, which I guess people often call cell shading, is partly a result of this look as well. And so, yeah, it's fun to just mix up all the different influences, and this is the result of, my inspiration that I'm taking from my downtime and introducing into my artwork. But yeah, those were my main observations of comparing the two illustrations. And as I've mentioned many times before, I don't actually have any intentions of creating a graphic novel or any kind of story with these characters. I just thought I might as well give them names since I've grown attached to their designs and have been drawing them on multiple occasions. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with my original characters. At some point in the future, I'd love to draw Buttercup and Aster together again in another illustration because I think they look very cute together, but that will likely not happen until a number of months from now because I have so many other things going on. Some of you might have noticed that I've been a little less active here on YouTube this month because I have been in the process of moving. I am currently in my new apartment now, and I am tidying up and just sort of taking care of loose ends with my previous apartment. And so, of course, that has been taking up a lot of my time lately. For those of you who didn't catch my most recent live stream or saw my last vlog, I am still going to be living in Toronto and I still have a studio space in my apartment. The new studio space, however, is a little bit smaller than my previous one, so I did have to downsize and am still figuring out how to navigate everything and organize the space, but overall, the building and the apartment is in much better shape, it's better maintained, and so the pros definitely outweigh the cons, despite the fact that it is slightly smaller. I did manage to get a few little snippets of footage here and there of me moving, so I will have some of that in an upcoming vlog, but I'm sure it comes to no surprise to most of you that moving in general is already hectic enough, so I wanted to really try and just focus on that and not worry too much about, setting up a camera and vlogging. So there probably isn't like a ton of actual moving vlog footage, but I think I managed to get something that I can show eventually. And don't worry, I do plan to make a dedicated new studio tour when I'm more settled in to this room. I think I have worked out the layout for all of the major furniture. At this point, it's more so about organization and decorating, which for me will definitely take a while because I find that stuff to be very tedious, but obviously very much worth it when it all comes together. Initially, I thought I would want to do a whole apartment tour as well down the line after it's been mostly set up, but I've come to realize that most of the apartment is actually quite dark and does not get much natural sunlight, which definitely is a bit of a bummer. But if people are interested enough to see an apartment tour, I'm sure I could make it work somehow. Thankfully, my studio does have windows, and so that was definitely the most important thing for me. It, again, is not quite as bright as my previous studio space, so again, that is a con, but I will make it work. I'll make it work. Last month, I had a moving sale on my online shop, which, by the way, thank you so much to everyone who made a purchase. It really helped in covering all of my moving expenses. And it also helped me clear some stock as well, which of course makes the move a little bit easier and is exciting because I do want to make new work and products this year. So it's good to move old stock to make room for new stuff. I will say though, through this move, I have continued to discover more old prints as well as lots of art supplies that could use a new home as well. So in the near future, keep your eyes peeled for a spring shop sale or something of the like. For those of you who missed my previous one, for the very first time, I had listed either unused or like very lightly used art supplies for free, and then you would just have to pay for the shipping. And I think that while having to pack all these kind of odd shaped items was a little bit of a challenge, I did feel really good about being able to give these art supplies a new home and new life. So I will say, if you are part of my Patreon page, they get first dibs because I let them access my shop an hour or so in advance. So if you are really keen on that, definitely keep your eyes out for that announcement for when the shop goes live again. Because I definitely have a box of art supplies that I have been accumulating now that will need new homes. And yeah, that being said, I want to make room for new products as well, because as it turns out, I am going to be attending a few conventions this year. Remember those? Back in the before times, I had done plenty of conventions and I would apply for them year after year. And so there were supposed to be a few that took place in 2020. I, of course, don't need to tell you as to why they didn't happen. But yeah, anyways, fast forward to this year, and now they're all slated to make a return, and thus my old applications from 2 years ago have now secured me a few tables. So as it stands now, I will be at Montreal Comic Con in July, and then I'll be at Pretty Heroes Con and Fan Expo Toronto in August. It feels pretty surreal to be going back to conventions, and so much has changed for me since I last attended one. When I was doing conventions in 2019 and earlier, I did not have a YouTube channel. I was still working my part-time retail job, among many other changes that has happened with my merchandise as well as my artwork. While I am a little bit reluctant to deal with the logistics of conventions, like having to lug all of my merchandise and the display products to the venues and having to set up the booth and dealing with all these lineups and stuff, I am really looking forward to being able to interact with some of you in real life. It really is such a rewarding and special moment to be able to connect with people through your art in person. That is definitely something that I have missed, and I think that I have, since grown my audience significantly since the last time I attended a convention. So it'll be really great to be able to, connect with some of you on the spot in person, and you can purchase from me directly without having to pay for shipping, and you can, talk to me a little bit. So I really look forward to that. And so if any of you are in Montreal or Toronto, I might be able to see you. Of course, if you are unable to attend the conventions, do not fret. I will still be listing the new products in my online shop as well, so you don't have to worry if you are not based here in Ontario or in Quebec and Montreal. So now that I'll be doing the convention circuit again, that encourages me to slip back into making more fan art, which honestly I do enjoy doing probably just as much as my original artwork. It just sort of depends on the day, I think, on which one I prefer. I will say though, juggling both original and fan art merch at conventions can prove to be a bit of a challenge, because I feel as though oftentimes people choose one or the other, but I will make it work somehow, because not only just for me, but I think most of you enjoy both as well. And I think those are the major things that are happening with me right now and for the upcoming months. I feel a little bit overwhelmed by it, but definitely am very excited at the same time. Also, before we part ways here, I would like to mention that this painting of Aster will be the April postcard for my Patreon page. For those of you who don't know, over on my Patreon page, not only do I have exclusive digital content, but every month I send out a postcard as well as a sticker. And so last month the postcard was of Buttercup, and now it's of Aster. So if you are interested in receiving this artwork as a print, sign up for the Sapphire or Emerald tier on my Patreon page by the end of this month, April 30th, and you will receive her in the mail. And of course, you will also have access to all of my exclusive videos and content as well. For those of you who have received Buttercup and will also be getting Aster, you'll notice that I purposely made them sort of looking at each other when you place them next to each other. So if you are interested in Buttercup, unfortunately the month has passed, but I often list leftovers in my shop if there are any. Joining my Patreon, of course, guarantees you each print, but there might be a few left over in the future. But anyways, that is it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye!